So Taylor gave you a brief intro from where they work, what they do. You can see in that pamphlet their full bios. So I thought the first question we'd ask would be an introduction question. And I'll ask each of you to tell us about that moment in your career where you thought, wow, tech is changing elections and I need to be a part of that.
So when we were back there before we were getting mic'd, I turned to Katie and I said, I'm going to answer the question that I want to, and not that one. So I'm going to tell you the reason that I got really interested in elections, because I sort of stumbled into technology. But for me, my interest in elections is really all thanks to North Dakota. So I don't know if there are any North Dakotans in the room. I know we're in Texas, but people travel. So in 2002, there was the Help America Vote Act that was passed that did a whole variety of things, including requiring that every state create a statewide voter registration list, which seems sort of like common sense, but it didn't exist universally before that. And there are various other provisions, and states got exemptions here or there. And North Dakota is exempt from the statewide voter registration list provision because of their innate North Dakotanness and their pioneering spirit. And many of you may know that North Dakota is the only state in the country without voter registration because of their innate North Dakotanness and pioneering spirit. So
you just show up at the polls on election day and you're set.
Yeah.
Nobody wanders into North Dakota to vote. So.
No, that's true. It's very cold.
Nobody registers.
Show of hands, how many of you knew that North Dakota didn't have registration? Yeah.
Oh, look, we're already...
We've all learned something. We can hang our hat on this day.
And then, so that's sort of why I'm interested in election administration. And then in terms of tech, I sort of just stumbled into it and have found that I really like it and think that it's a cool way to get information out there. So there's that.
I ended up here because Maegan and I had exactly the opposite moment of insight to what you described, which was technology is making so many things better. Why the bleep isn't it here in elections? Why are elections not getting any of the benefits of it? So I was in graduate school. I was actually studying international democracy. I was interested in how we built and designed and promoted good elections elsewhere. But I had a classmate who missed an election back home because he didn't know what was happening. It was local and he wasn't following the local news from away in grad school. Decided, okay, he'd re-register at school. Missed a special election because he'd just gotten registered and didn't get the postcard in time. He missed one other. I don't even remember why on that one. And he went, there should just be a reminder service. There should be a thing that can text me when an election is happening that affects my address. That must exist. And he went Googling and he didn't find it. And he came and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, you're kind of a tech geek. Who's built this? How would I build this? And I first said, well, I'm from a really well-governed town in central Missouri and I get these from my clerk as emails. I think that's pretty normal. We went and researched, no, I have one of the best election administrators in the country. Almost no one else gets those emails. And I went, well, that can't be very hard to do. Let's make a hobby project of this. We'll build a proof of concept. It might become my graduate thesis. That was 6.5 years ago.
Well, we had talked, three of us talked about starting gently and easing into a round of questions, and we thought, nah, let's not do that. Let's get right to something really exciting. Let's talk about security in elections. And so there's a lot of questions about, with all this technology in the election space, there's opportunities for people to rig the election system and get into the data and change things. How do we squash the haters, or should we be worried?
We shouldn't worry.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's too many systems. They're too separate from each other. So much of our elections is still done on paper, which is in some ways frustrating and in some ways really safe. You cast a paper ballot and the things that you could mess with would in fact be maybe the voter roll. So you could make the lines longer. You could maybe make it harder to verify who's supposed to vote. Worst case scenario. You could delay getting results out. You could force more hand counting. But fundamentally, the question of can everyone cast a ballot and can we verify whose ballot said what and how it all happened, it's fundamentally pretty stable. There's not a lot of excitement there.
There are over 10,000 election jurisdictions in the country. So there are states, there are counties, there are cities, towns, And every state has some sort of combination of that. Texas is sort of the definition of decentralization.
154 counties, really.
But then there are cities in Texas that administer their own elections that the counties don't know about. There are elections within counties that the state doesn't know about, and so on and so forth. But so the decentralization sounds super inefficient, and from a civic tech perspective, it is really inefficient. But the decentralization is what makes it great, and what makes it so hard to hack and so hard to rig, if we're going to use the language that's out there right now, because there are 10,000 election jurisdictions. There are over 100,000 polling locations.
Oh.
Probably 150, 200.
I think it's more like 250,000.
Yeah. Polling locations, and that's vote centers, that's early vote locations, and then all of those are staffed by poll workers, and who are both volunteers, some are paid, some are full-time staff, some are temporary staff. There are so many different people involved in the process, and it's so decentralized that it makes any sort of organized effort to rig or hack the outcome so unlikely. And even with respect to the voter registration rolls, even states with online voter registration and states without are making backups of their voter registration lists, most I think nightly, if not more frequently.
Yeah.
So, would messing with a voter registration list cause problems? Yes, not irreparable problems, but it would make lines longer and things like that. But even that seems sort of unlikely.
Yeah. You do a threat matrix, and the things that you could actually pull off don't cause very significant harm.
And the Illinois and Arizona that I know has been sort of out there, no records were messed with or altered in any way. Like, they were looking for personally identifiable information, which, newsflash, all of that information is public information, and in every state you can either buy the voter file for a nominal fee or an exorbitant fee, depending on the state, but it's out there. That's how, we're all getting these annoying mailers and calls and stuff from the campaigns. It's not because you necessarily gave them your information, it's because they bought the voter file and they found you.
So if I'm having holiday dinner with my crazy uncle and he says, no, Maegan, I'm telling you, they can get into the system, what's my quick 1 or 2 sentence response? Because he's not going to listen to me full of logic. The quick way, I'm like, stop it.
No, nod and eat your potatoes.
Or ask him which system, because there isn't one system, right? There's a voter registration system, there's the vote tabulation system, which is the counting mechanism. There's the actual machine that you vote on, that, as Katie pointed out, the vast majority of the country votes on paper, where I don't know how many of you took the SATs on paper, but you fill in the little bubbles. And then there's the election night results system. So there's all of these different systems. So in addition to all of the decentralization, you ask your crazy uncle which system he's talking about.
He will not have an answer to that question.
Right.
No.
So you both do really important and cool work. Tell us the coolest thing you're working on right now.
Oh, that's hard right now.
The medium plus coolest thing you're working on.
A nutshell recap of what we work on. The voter reminder service that I described, thinking would be an easy hobby project, ended up becoming TurboVote. It's a site that you can go to, and if anyone wants to load turbovote.org on your phone right now, it looks really great on mobile, I promise. You can sign up for election reminders for wherever you live. We'll do voter registration, we do absentee balloting assistance. We walk through sort of getting a profile of you as a voter so that we can send customized reminders to what you need. That is working with about 200 colleges and universities across the country. So one of the things I'm excited about is that Harvard registered half of its undergraduate student body in a 2-week period, simply by putting it in an iframe on their class registration process and calling it a mandatory part of signing up for classes for the fall. It's a 2-minute process. You tell a student they have to do it, it turns out they do it. You tell them that it's part of their civic education, they do that. Miami-Dade College has signed up into the tens of thousands of their students now as a big commuter campus. That's a really hard milestone to reach, and they are proving that you don't have to be a tight-knit, really wealthy school like Harvard to pull off those kinds of numbers either. WashU did it around the presidential debate that they got to host and made a huge impact locally. So I'm seeing schools across the country taking sort of that kind of outreach and folding it into education. So when we're talking about civics and when the conversation today has been about establishing those habits and tying it in, it's really exciting getting to go from having just built an app to seeing those additional levels of engagement, like we were talking about in the Giving Tuesday talk with Henry's ladder there. We're seeing it getting shared, we're seeing it get embedded, and seeing it get remixed. Ditto Univision having put a register to vote banner across the top of their website above the news content, and seeing the kind of engagement they're getting and how we're talking about it, not talking about media, not just informing people, but helping invite them in and remind them where they can take that news content and what they should be doing with it and where they can go past that. And really finding some actors that are less, when we talk about civics, we haven't been talking about higher ed. We haven't been talking too much about the news media, though the last panel started to get into that. We definitely haven't been talking about like consumer companies, but Starbucks is putting voter registration ads on their coffee sleeves right now. The number of not usual suspects who have come into the space and the sheer amount of conversation about who's welcome in and how we can all participate, and the number of people who aren't typically asked to take part in elections that are this year is, I think, definitely the most exciting thing I get to be working on right now.
I'll come back to that.
Yes.
But
Yes.
so the point that you just made about sort of bringing in sort of non-traditional communities and getting out there, I think that's one of the big innovations that we're really seeing this year. Google has for several years now been very, very active in the civic technology space and the civic engagement space.
Yeah.
I think, and that has sort of slowly increased over time, and I would really sort of emphasize the slow, because a lot of companies just don't see that as part of their mission, and there's a lot of conflation of sort of civic engagement and politics. And if you are Starbucks or you are some other retailer or sort of consumer-based company, most of them tend to really try to keep the politics out of what they do because that impacts their bottom line. But I think that what we're seeing in 2016, thanks in very large part to what TurboVote is doing with the TurboVote Challenge, is that a lot of these companies are really starting to see that they can get engaged in a civic way, and that doesn't hurt them, it helps them, and that makes them better citizens, and therefore that sort of overall sort of increases the glow around them and sort of their corporate social responsibility. And I think that's one of the big takeaways for 2016, at least for me.
And I'd love to talk a little bit about the mechanics of that, which you've helped do. Sort of the baby step one in civic tech is, okay, let's build an app. Everybody loves to build their app. I'm not hating on it, I started there too. But then when you've got an app, all you can say is use my app or maybe share my app. And so when we were talking about those ways that you get people to build their own and remix their own and to join in and to take deeper part, you have to give them more ways. An app is a closed little unit. You interact with it on its terms. So that was where we started, and one of the ways we've grown is getting into building more standard format open data, which sounds way less sexy, but then lets other people build other things. There's APIs, which help with that kind of thing. So one of Amy's big innovations over time, and one I've been glad to collaborate with her on, in what Google has been doing, is taking the problem of where do I vote, and taking the data set, ugly and messy and distributed across 10,000 separate elections offices as it is.
And multiple different systems coming full circle.
That links every residential address in the country to its precinct, to its polling place, and to its ballot contents. And some of the ways that's gotten remixed are some of the hopes where I'd like to see us in the future grow towards doing that with election dates and jurisdictions. There's not a single repository of where elections are happening throughout 2017. There are municipal elections happening every single Tuesday in 2017, I promise you. Nobody has that full list.
Not only does nobody have that full list, it's not even like, oh, I have to go to 51 different websites to get that. It's, I might have to go to 10,000 different websites.
I have a full-time staff member who does that.
Sorry,
Come. No.
I guess like in regards to that, like what ethical responsibility do you think that like government officials
Let me repeat that so everyone can hear. She asked about the ethical responsibility of government entities, making sure that those things all work out, or what should their role be in that process.
I think that the narrative right now is that it's hard to vote. And the truth is that for the vast majority of Americans, not 100%, let me be crystal clear, not 100%, but for the vast majority of Americans, it is easier to vote in 2016 than it has ever been before. Now, there are still the obstacles that we've talked about, and into the ethics of it, I don't necessarily have an opinion. I do think that election officials, the vast majority of them, do want to make sure that voters know about elections because they're holding them anyway. It's costing them money anyway. They might as well have more than a handful of people doing it. But don't let the decentralization play into the narrative that it's hard to vote because it is actually much easier to vote than it ever has been before. 32 states in the District of Columbia have online voter registration, for example. Texas doesn't. It should. Maybe in 2017, we can all cross our fingers and toes for that. But you can do absentee ballot requests online in a lot of states, but there are also services like TurboVote and others that make that easier. So there's a lot. This is one of the big ways I think that Civic Tech has been very, very useful in sort of getting that information out there.
Well, but I'd also add that there's a big difference between an election official making voting easy for their constituents who are right near them and an election official making it easy for an entity like mine or Google's to have standard data across a bunch of counties. I'll both shout out and slightly chide Wisconsin, which has 1,900 election officials for a single state. So when we say there are about 10,000 elections offices in the country, 20% of them are in Wisconsin. They do this at the municipal level. And I find that really frustrating because when I'm trying to find out about elections, that's 1,900 places I have to go. But I'm not a single voter in a single one of those towns where when I call Wisconsin and I ask them about how they do early voting, many of the clerks say, someone calls me on my phone and says I want to vote early, and I get where and when they'd like me to come, and I go to them. So there are systems of easy voting that aren't technologified. Let's do that. They aren't standardized. They're hugely personal, and there's actually still a really rich value to them. It's just much harder to translate that kind of relationship of you call the person down the street who you know and they come bring you your ballot, and being able to publish that in a standard format for everyone everywhere. And how to keep some of those benefits of that personal relationship with your clerk and some of the very real Americana of these small town election systems while also trying to open it up and make it legible across the country and have a single lookup on Google that can handle all that. Those two things are sometimes in tension, and yet I'd say they're both good. And building the latter without destroying some of those former institutions is one thing I'm really wary of. Is we're going to have to bring the clerks along with us, and we're going to have to fold them in, and we can't go build this outside of them, and we can't talk about disrupting them. They are there and they are providing a really valuable service, and when we're talking about standardizing their data, we need to carry them with us and help build what they need. It is that with, not for again, and when we talk about with, we don't just mean the citizens, we mean the people running their elections also.
I've got a question up here with Mike.
Yeah, I'm curious if you could speak to, I'm curious if anyone either on the panel or of people who are studying the ways in which tech could be used to address voter ID laws, and specifically predictions that hundreds of thousands of people in states that have voter ID laws wouldn't vote, including in Texas, although that was overturned. And just ways in which there's any kind of ways of using technology to monitor the ways that people are turned away from the polls because of voter ID laws throughout the states in the United States that have that. You haven't really addressed that question, I don't think.
So it's true, in part because getting an ID is usually a process that still involves a trip to a physical location, and the organizations that I think are helping do that are not, for the most part, technology organizations. I think the thing I would nominate there actually is a journalistic and tech enterprise called Electionland, where ProPublica is taking a lot of the data. They're working off of the Google Civic Info data, as far as I know. They're working off of the polling place data set that Amy and I have worked on over the years. And they are putting out a platform that makes it really easy nationally for people to report any issues at the polls, so voting ID included, and then have brought in regional news sources, people with that deep knowledge and an understanding of how things work locally and what neighborhoods have what needs and which polling locations likely serve which kinds of communities, and giving them those reports to be able to do much more in-depth actual investigative journalism on. And I think if any stories about voter ID and its disparate impacts come out, it's going to be from a collaboration like that, which is technology powered, but is still very much shoe leather journalism.
Another question over here.
Yeah, I want to challenge the notion that you mentioned earlier about why can't we, technologicalize a lot of
I love that my coining awkward terms is going to stick
these
with me.
institutions, because we already have with Starbucks, we have with a lot of other economized industries across our country, right? And if we're going to keep this, I guess, American specific, we also have to remember, I guess I'll qualify it by saying that it's an opt-in system for the most part here, right? Many countries make it mandatory for you to vote, but here it's you opt in, and then once you opt in, you decide you want to vote. There's like 15 more opt-ins to get to vote, right?
Yep.
So why? Because I'm from Colorado, where everyone votes by mail. You register online. You have same day registration, and they send ballots out.
Not only do they mail ballots to everybody, if you don't want to do that, you can just go to a polling location.
You can go to a polling location.
Colorado is the best, most hybrid model.
Election administration gold stars for Colorado.
Yeah,
all around.
California just passed legislation, and the governor signed it. So they'll be implementing that over the next couple of years. But I digress.
So at the very base level, if we're expecting Amazon and our local Etsy shop to be able to cater to us so we don't have to leave our couch to buy like 15 different remotes or something, whatever we want, why can't we expect the same for voting, right? It doesn't mean, because a lot of these institutions are, these voting precincts and centers are partly run by volunteers. So what's the counter argument?
I would say I would address part of that, and then you should feel free to take it away. But so the difference between something like Amazon or banking or something like that and voting is that if Amazon sends you the wrong thing or your order gets messed up, that's easily fixed, right? If your vote is somehow messed up, either because the system has a problem or it gets lost or something like that, that is a much larger and very different kind of problem, because there is no do-over in elections. So we talk about how, we bank online and that's secure, but like if your account gets hacked and it gets drained of every dime you've ever earned plus, the bank can take recourse and get you your money back and sort of make you whole again. But from a voting perspective, we have a secret ballot, and if something were to go awry, there is no do-over. There is no real way to fix that.
I'm actually not sure that we disagree at all. I think that what you were saying with Colorado is a great model that we're headed towards, and that the trick is one of, as we introduce technology, making sure we do it in ways that election officials can be part of, can help design, and can then own and maintain. My wariness would be only taking those relationships they have with their voters, taking everything that they know about their communities and care deeply about, and erasing that in the name of making it easier to do a standardized sort of tech process across everywhere. That local knowledge is valuable, and that if we come in and sort of Googleify all of it, and I'm just going to keep coining terms, at the cost of harming that kind of personal relationship, that's the only thing I would be wary of. So doing it with their participation and insight. And I think that many states are enthusiastically embracing reforms like Colorado's, California's following. I think that making the opt-in a lot lower barrier is taking off. Oregon started doing what they're calling automatic voter registration, where every time you interact with a government office in the state of Oregon, if you don't show up on the voter file, they'll be like, hey, do you want to be on the voter file? And if you answer yes, they put you in. They're taking people, anyone that they know about who's in one of their government databases, they're putting on the voter file. You can still choose not to vote. There's still several more opts-in that you have to take. But that notion of making it so that you have to have thought to go register in an active way, they're changing that. And 4 or 5 other states have already followed them?
Yeah, well, I'd argue Delaware was first, but
Okay.
But yeah, the other, oh, rats. Never mind. It'll come back to me. I'm
It'll
sure
come back. I've got a mic with a question over here.
I have a comment and a question. First, I just got a driver's license in Texas, and while that was really hard to do, they did register me to vote, which was wonderful.
Woohoo!
So I get to vote in this election.
Have you confirmed?
Yeah. Wait, no, maybe not. What do I have to do next?
I would just double check that it went through as appropriate.
And how would I do that?
You would go to
There's a website.
Yeah, you would go to the Secretary of State's website and you would
Texas.org, Secretary of State's website.
confirm your voter registration.
I will confirm. I got something in the mail.
Okay, great. Then you're set.
Okay, great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be alarmist.
No, it's good. I'm glad you alarmed me. This matters a lot to me. And it should matter to us all. So I was just really excited about the example you gave about Harvard and their website and Starbucks. And Harvard's website in particular, I was like, well, that's fabulous. We want more educated young voters. Like that's great, right? But then I started thinking, like, wait a second. Is that their biggest target population for more voters, right? And so I was just curious, do you guys have any exciting examples or ideas for how we reach the most marginalized voters, the folks who aren't just skipping the registration process, but are really disconnected from the experience of democracy in America? Hard question, I'm sorry.
Is always the hard question. No, I think it's the question you have to ask every time here, because if you're building new things that keep reaching the usual suspects, you're not changing the system. So that is a question that I have to grapple with, because it's easy to work with colleges and universities, and those are great new voters to bring in, and I love to brag on them. You're describing communities that take a lot more investment and time. I know I'm really excited. I'm not personally involved with this one, but the New York City Campaign Finance Board and NYC Votes community have deliberately formed a partnership with NYCHA and are reaching out to every single resident of the New York City Housing Authority. I'm excited where that might go. I would love to be able to support that in the future, and I'm hoping that we'll get to be a part of it. I really love that I'm getting to work with Univision. I do think that we're dealing with a lot of naturalized citizens and first-time voters and non-native English speakers or non-English speakers, full stop. I'm not personally doing this. I'm really excited by a project called VoterVox, being built by 18 Million Rising, that has built a really simple app that you can come sign up on, either to volunteer as a speaker of, these are overwhelmingly Asian languages, who can act as a translator at the polls for someone from your community who's low English and is otherwise intimidated, or you can sign up as someone in need of election assistance and have a buddy sent with you to the polls to be your personal translator. I'm going to be excited to see where that goes. So in election technology, there are initiatives for that. It is hard to remember and to deliberately target those kinds of communities, and we can continue to do better.
So the other thing I'll add is the same law that required that you be offered the opportunity to register to vote at the DMV, the National Voter Registration Act, also requires that the opportunity to register to vote be made available at other social service agencies as well. DMV is the one that in the elections community we tend to focus on the most, because the vast majority of the population interacts with the DMV on a regular basis, right? You have a life change, you move, you get married, you get divorced, you go to the DMV because you need to either update your name or update your address so that you can travel and drive and whatever. And so there's been a lot of focus in the elections community. We call this the motor voter. There's been a lot of focus in the elections community on motor voter and improving the integration between Department of Motor Vehicles and elections. But that, in my mind, is a little bit narrow, and we need to. And although it serves the most people, it doesn't serve everybody. And I am starting to think through how we can engage more with the other agencies that are covered by the NVRA and other social service agencies to make sure that they're not left behind by this sort of the technology upgrades that are happening to make the integration between DMVs and motor vehicles, DMVs and elections more efficient.
Yeah. Amy, did you remember what you were going to say?
I did. It was some of what you point out, I think, is also a generational thing, and I think, Katie, you can probably attest to this as well. The elections community, the election official community, particularly local election officials, tend to be older, and that's not a bad thing. A lot of them have been doing it for a really long time, and by and large, they all mean well,
Very much.
and work really, really hard at their jobs. But I think that as sort of younger, newer people get engaged in the process, there will start to be, a kind of shift in the way that election administrators look at this problem.
Oh, here we go, right here.
Hi, over here. So I'm a freshman here at UT, and I've worked a lot with voter registration. And for example, on the last day to register to vote, we stood out from like 8 a.m. to midnight. I personally was out there from 2 to 12 registering voters. And now we're phone banking to call voters and help them figure out like what type of ID they have and what they can bring to the poll, how they're going to get there, what day. And so have you thought of, pairing up, certainly you've paired up with Harvard, but pairing up with other universities to help build up that information, because there's UT's certainly not unique. I'm sure at every university there's organizations who know all this information for that specific area. Have you thought of going to student organizations to build up this voter information? Because we're also doing work with like the local ballots and the local people on our ballots.
At most of our partner campuses, it's usually an Office of Civic Life, or it is the Office of Student Life, or it is the college Dems and Republicans teamed up with each other, or student government, and that kind of hands-on pairing, so that it's not just the app, but the app plus. Because then they also use the data about who's signed up and registered through us as a tech platform, and then they can follow up via phone and email. So then it's a central list. It's organized, it's got everyone's preferences. We actually then help give them what they need to go chase their classmates and do things. And it's a great and important sort of partnership and pairing. You don't sort of build the app and put it out in the world. You build the app and then you find friends and people who can work with it and around it, and who you can. I know this word got some bad press earlier today, and I'm not actually sure why, but you can empower them with it instead of just sort of releasing it to the ether.
We do that here. So
Yay! You bet, I would too.
Just signed up another campus.
We partnered with UT Austin in the past, and I would love to partner with UT Austin in the future.
I've got another question at the top.
Hi. So kind of going back in the past, but I want to address something that was mentioned in this latest debate, the latest third debate between the presidential election. So I know that you talked about how it's the voting, like the polls cannot be rigged, but you also said that there are like stipulations in place that there are multiple systems that it's decentralized. But I wanted to know if you could talk about or put that into context with the 2000 election, where the Bush and Al Gore, where the votes had to be recounted in Florida. And so how do you account for that, and in reassuring people who are now skeptical or paranoid about the election either being rigged or like not being accounted for?
So the issue in 2000 was, quite frankly, bad election administration, right? It was a poorly designed ballot, and everything was confusing. That wasn't fraud. Frankly, that's the way the process is supposed to work. That if the results are close, there is supposed to be a recount. The reason it was so close is because of bad ballot design and a whole host of other reasons. So that really had nothing to do with fraud or rigging or hacking or anything that we're talking about. Anything that we're talking about right now. I had something else. Go ahead.
The last panel talked about how hard it is to do good UX.
Yeah.
It is really hard to do good UX. That was a poorly designed ballot. There's actually now a center that came out of some of that research called the Center for Civic Design. They've actually done an entire series of field guides to ensuring voter intent. They're these beautiful little bitty brown paper booklets that are very readable, lots of bullet points. They're designed specifically for election administrators and state authorities. And in response to that work, Whitney Quisenberry still does that from the nonprofit space. Her partner in design, Dana Chisnell, is actually working for the federal government now in some of these ways. Have managed to help a number of states and municipalities redesign how they do ballot layout, how they do voter guides that go out in advance, how they write better instructions for voters, and there will still always be progress to go. There are some places where bad ballot design is actually legislated, and it will take real change to make it better. But at the same time, actually, since 2000, and realizing that particular problem, the amount of energy that's been put into making elections user-friendly in that way also has been really, I think, significant and worth talking about as a brag point.
And on the voter registration side as well, you know, lists as a whole are a lot cleaner than they used to be. Don't get me wrong, they're not perfect. I think, you know, we can probably we all know somebody who, you know, went to the polls and you know, the information was confused or you know, we've all heard the stories, but a lot of states are taking a lot of efforts now to make sure that their voter registration rolls are a lot cleaner. There's data sharing going on across states. There's a variety of different programs that do that. There's the Electronic Registration Information Center, which is ERIC, which is 20 states and DC who share lists with each other, voter registration lists, but also DMV information, so that they can get information not just about duplicates and movers and things like that, but also about eligible but unregistered voters, right? Because of the point I made before, which is people go to the DMV when they have a life event, and you can compare that to a voter registration roll. There's also another program called the Interstate Crosscheck that does something similar. So there's been a lot of strides taken on the administrative front to make sure that good administration is sort of happening across the board. And it's been in things like ballot design and list maintenance and areas like that. The biggest impact, I think, of the rhetoric around rigging and hacking is the voter confidence piece that you raised. It's the most, I think, disheartening, because it's sort of disproportionately impacting, I think, people who are sort of less inclined to participate in the process as it is. So if you've never voted before, or you're an infrequent voter, or you're brand new to the process, if you're hearing all of this, like, well, you know, someone's got their finger on the scale kind of thing, it makes you feel less confident about participating. And frankly, presidential elections are the gateway drug of elections. Like, if turnout is the highest for presidential elections, and then it just sort of,
Is that the scientific term?
yeah. And so it's very disheartening from a civic engagement perspective to hear what's going on, because it's not just going to impact 2016, it could have long-term impact. Because people who aren't participating in 2016 aren't going to be like, great, my mayoral election is next year, and even though I didn't vote for that huge one, I'm going to vote for this tiny one. So, you know, it's something that we need to be cognizant of as this is going on.
I'm going to take one more question right here. It'll be the last question.
Okay. Thanks. This is really cool and important work. I'm wondering your feedback on the Estonian online voting program.
Don't make me talk about online voting.
No, but it's something where I don't know if we could import it, but it seems like it's working very well for the Estonians who have a lot of different characteristics than we do. But do you think it's a plausible model? Could we use it?
To the best of my understanding, it involves a national identity card that is that also includes a chip that is being used as basically the private key for encrypting a vote.
Wait, let's take a step back. For those of you who don't know how they vote in Estonia.
Okay, Estonia has online voting, mostly. I think that the one time we talked about establishing a national ID of any sort went down in such spectacular flames that I'm not sure we can borrow it as a model or look to it.
I will say what I think that is personally cool about the Estonian model is that you can vote multiple times and it's only the last one that counts, right?
It's the same account for your banking, and you could do all your civic engagement online through this.
So I mean, I agree with with Katie's point about the national ID card, but I think I'm pretty sure it's in Estonia where you can vote multiple times and it's just the last one that counts, because that would, you know, certainly it eliminates the incentive for vote buying and things like that, because I can take your money, but then I can go cast another ballot.
I'll admit, of all of the directions I see us going, I think that the improvements in ease of voting by mail are catching up a lot more quickly, and that something much more like a Colorado-style system is going to be where
that's
we're able
right.
to vote from our couches, with, you know, our own preferences, our own privacy, and our comfort much more quickly than doing so on our iPhones. So.
All right, we are at the end, but I wanted to give our panelists an opportunity
Why not?
to one last burning thought, one last burning desire of knowledge you'd like to share with our passionate ambassadors of civic engagement here in this room. These are the people who care the most. What do you got?
Yeah.
So you guys are all tech savvy. I see a lot of laptops. I see basically all smartphones. Be a poll worker, right? Like, go participate in the process. If you're concerned about the security of the process or the integrity of the process, participate in it. Yep. And be the person who checks in voters, or be the person who helps explain the process, because voters on the whole feel that their ballot at their precinct is going to be cast in, or counted as cast. So be a part of that process and make sure that you know, that when your friends and your neighbors get there, that they see you and they see a friendly face and that they feel welcomed into the process. I know Dana would love to have you. And the other thing is that you can participate in the process in other ways. You can watch logic and accuracy tests. That's some of the testing that I alluded to earlier that they do on voting technology before an election. You can watch it online. A lot of election officials either make that available, like anybody can come to the actual location, or they live stream it, or they use Periscope and Facebook Live. So these are all ways that you can participate in the process and then go out and be an ambassador and explain to people that, no, I worked the polls. Let me tell you why what happened at my precinct was secure, because I was there. And I think that sort of peer-to-peer communication is really important.
I'm actually going to stick on the personal theme, but go from just security to participation more generally. So at the easiest, make sure you vote. Make sure you vote in not just in, what is it now, 17 days? Sounds right.
Yeah.
But also the next time municipal elections roll around. Vote all the way down the ballot. Pay attention to the primaries. Be involved at all of the levels, and if you don't know when those smaller ones are happening, sign up for TurboVote. Past that, the next level of hard is invite others. And as we're saying, people need to feel welcomed. People don't independently decide to register. As I was doing user testing towards redesigning how TurboVote was going to work, one of the things I was asking people is, so tell me about the most recent time you registered to vote or updated your voter registration. I was looking for process answers. I wanted to hear if people had gone online. I wanted to hear if they'd used a paper form, and if they'd gotten a paper form, where they'd gotten it from. I was looking for technical details. Every single answer I got told me who had registered them to vote. Nobody said, I went online and I signed up on the thing. Someone said, it was my 18th birthday, and my dad sat me down at the kitchen table with the laptop and put the website up and said, you're old enough now, this is the first thing you have to do. Someone talked about, someone talked about having moved campuses and transferred schools, and having known that he needed to update his registration but been too busy with a lot of the more practical details of getting set up in a new place. And he said, there was this guy with a clipboard, and he actually just looked like he was having kind of a bad day, and he looked kind of sad, so I let him register me. So make it your friends, but fine, they're the usual suspects. Make it strangers. Make it communities who aren't otherwise feeling welcomed. Think about where you have ties to people who otherwise might or might not be participating, who you're comfortable asking to come to the polls. Not literally with you, not necessarily a ride, but who hasn't been invited into American democracy that you can make welcome. And then from there, the next level of difficulty is what tools do you still want or need that you can see are missing? And then the first step is there an app, and can you promote it? Second one is there an app, and do you need to build it? And third is, if there were going to be an app, what data would it require that you can help make open, that you can help get published, that you can help make available to others to share and remix? Thinking about that ladder of engagement, start with the voting, but of all of the steps you can do, what else can you be doing to help open up the system and to become a more active part of it yourself? If you've got ideas, bring them to me. I will gladly welcome you into the civic tech space. If you've got burning desires, there's room for many, many more of you. in all of this?
Please join me in thanking them for their knowledge and their warm, fuzzy feelings they've given us all.